Welcome one, welcome all, to the Most Hated Characters Part 2, featuring 3 Fire Emblem characters that fall under my intentionally broad and ever-growing term of Most Hated, i.e., morally questionable, scummy, disliked within their own universe, notorious among the community, and something more particular for this batch, those who are assholes. These 3 characters can't help but tear into their allies and evaluate them when nobody asked. And without further ado, let's start with number 1. Shinon is introduced in the early game of Path of Radiance, fighting alongside Ike, Titania, and his close friend Gottry. He's an immensely skilled bow user and greatly reveres Ike's father, Grail. It's also clear that he has a deep respect for Titania too, but he has 2 characteristics that make him an asshole. He really hates Ike, and he's a racist. When the Grail mercenaries rescue Elincia and then consider escorting her to Gallia from Crimea for sanctuary, Shinon is opposed to the idea, stating that he doesn't want to go into Gallia territory as it's the stinking beast country. A couple chapters later, when Ike asks the real difference between Laguz and Bjork, Shinon has some choice words, to say the least. They're a hairy bunch, I tell ya. Ugly as sin, too. Their faces are all fangs and whisker. Their claws are like daggers, razor sharp and deadly. And even though they can't speak our language, they're beasts through and through. Savages. Everyone. His feelings are pretty self-explanatory. Like Jill, Shinon probably grew up being told to hate them too, and the sentiment stuck. He took his negative perception of Laguz when he met them and painted a broad brush across the entire race. Shinon is generally a cold person, and sympathy or care for others is something he only really shares with a select few. But growing up in a cold and unloving environment, his mother never hugged him for example, probably had to do with his outlook on others and the world. Having an unloving and bad childhood doesn't excuse his racism and bigotry on display in both Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn, but I do think it's fair to say that Shinon is a product of his upbringing. He has 3 supports. Gottry and Rolf showcase a side of him that is friendly and compassionate. He is quite patient with his wholesome yet stupid friend Gottry, as he informs him that he's being conned by a woman who struck his heart. With Rolf, he showcases his convictions. Only a complete madman wants to be involved in the death of someone else, especially if it's a kid. But the sad thing is, it's more about making ourselves feel better than saving the life of another. The fear of being responsible for a death is always in the back of our minds, so we try to lessen the guilt as much as possible. Humans, most humans, feel the pain of others. Holding that back is a lot harder than you think. Shinon is capable of some form of empathy. He has been hurt. Grail's death was extremely hard on him, and he wants to get Rolf off the battlefield if he can help it. It's nice characterization, and allows us to sympathize with him, but I can't help but notice the specific word choice. Humans. He doesn't include Laguz here. He deems them beneath himself, and insults them at every chance he gets. Oh look, it's the half-breed bird brain. What a pleasant surprise. Peck anyone lately? Shinon loves to throw insults, especially towards Laguz, but luckily, his A support has him eating humble pie, finding out that Janaf is actually 110 years old, despite his young appearance. Recalling that Shinon dislikes the idea of children fighting, and doesn't really tolerate people younger than him and not respecting their wishes, the revelation that Janaf is a lifetime older than him causes him to change his tune, to being somewhat respectful and curious to learn more about him. In Radiant Dawn, you'd think his racism has been toned down after fighting a war alongside them and somewhat befriending Janaf, but nah. There's a base conversation in part 3 between himself, Gottry, Lyre, and Kaiza. Shinon catches Lyre's attention when he says the word subhuman out in public. The two get into an argument, and when things get tense, Kaiza comes in to break up the fight, insisting that Lyre apologize for getting angry. Yet, Shinon takes exception to Kaiza's dignified behavior. I hate it when subhumans like him act all high and mighty, pretending to be just like us Bjork. He's even worse than the other hairball. So, no. He hasn't changed his views on Laguz. He deems them as subhuman still, but Kaiza is a little more patient and dignified of a soldier than Lyre is. Despite this, however, Shinon doubles down on his hatred. He hates it even more when Laguz apparently try to pretend to be more like Bjork. There is just no winning with Shinon. Either you're a subhuman, or you're even worse of a subhuman for being polite to others and acting in ways that are apparently exclusive to humans. The irony, of course, is that Shinon is actually the one who's even worse. He's arrogant and close-minded. To be fair, he does restrain himself from calling Nesala, the king of Kilvis, a subhuman in their sea support. Good save, dude. But in his A address with Tabarn, he calls him a decent guy and corrects himself, indicating that race may actually have nothing to do with the value of life. In both games, he can start turning a new leaf through supports. Better late than never, I suppose. But one thing he won't bend on? His hatred for Ike. He's quite forward about why. He thinks Ike takes all of his opportunities for granted and is a spoiled child. Unlike Shinon, who clearly had a rough upbringing, Ike's life was good. At least, the one that Shinon would know. Grail loves his children and always provided for them. Ike trains with training weapons until Daddy Grail thinks he's ready to take on real jobs, and even gives him a leadership role very early in his mercenary career. In a way, Shinon's right. Ike hasn't really done anything to prove his worth. Yet here he is, being treated like royalty by his allies. It's not that Shinon has a problem with him eventually inheriting the mercenaries, but Shinon already has an issue with the young folk, especially those who annoy him. Ike is just the perfect storm of nuisances to him, and it's no surprise that he bails after Grail is killed and Ike becomes the new leader. When he confronts Ike as a Daean soldier, and loses, Ike brings up Shinon's hatred against him. Ike knows why he hates him. He was young, weak, and spoiled. Everything Shinon hates in a person. But despite the loss, effectively proving that Shinon is weaker than Ike is now, he chooses to hate and resent him anyway, as indicated in his support with Janov. He also gets wasted in a base conversation and drunkenly rambles in front of Ike's face, how much he still hates him, and insisting that he should take over the company. You're in love with the pretty widow princess. You're fighting side by side with your subhuman pals. Yes, you're moving up. Ooh, look at you. It's big Mr. Ike leading the good life. Screw you. You always get everything. Don't you ever want to give up anything? No, not big important Mr. Ike. You've always been like this. You act like you're not interested in something, then you swoop in and steal it away. Spoiler alert. He still doesn't like him in Radiant Dawn. It's a combination of spite and envy, and despite losing, he doesn't care. He still chooses to resent and hate him. And honestly, it's fair. You can't win everybody over. People like Shinon, who are incredibly set in their own way, or are too proud to concede when they are in the wrong, or lesser than, exist. Felix. Felix is a fascinating character, and there's a lot to be said about his morality and perception of himself and his ideals, especially considering how his view of himself changes when not in Azure Moon. What is it with blue-haired characters voiced by Lucian Dodge that are so strongly characterized? I will absolutely need to preface this so as not to get rained down by dislikes. Remember the criteria of this video. Shinon isn't really hated within his own universe, or even by the community at large, but he is an asshole. Felix is similar in this regard. Not nearly the same level, mind you, but he is easily one of the most outwardly dickish characters the series has seen. Felix's batitude can be categorized into two tiers. Number 1, a mood, or number 2, grade A offensive. The former generally showcases terse and quick-tempered exchanges with others, while the latter showcases Felix taking that mood to the extreme and being overly critical and overtly cruel. Felix has a linear path to self-development. All he wants to do is acquire strength to continue winning battles and to protect his allies. That is his highest priority in life, and doesn't pay much attention to other things besides training. Anyone who tries to take him away from this training is often met with indignance. He straight up calls Dorothea a nuisance, a pest, and later incorrectly assumes that she's just trying to marry him for his wealth as a noble. That last part in particular is reflective of a common tendency for him to evaluate and criticize his peers to highlight the things he doesn't like about them. It's not veiled as anything more than just his brutally honest thoughts on them. He thinks Dorothea is loud and annoying. He calls Sylvain careless and lazy, and evaluates Ash's passion for reading Knight's Tales as wastes of time and actually morally damaging, apparently. But this is just Felix light mode. Yeah, he gets annoyed easily and doesn't really care how his words can be uncalled for in the moment, and is close-minded and tends to let his biases take over, but he can also be flagrant, bordering on verbally abusive, cruel, and unnecessarily aggressive. Before we continue exploring this more aggressive side to him, and talking about his other support partners, the Faerghast characters in particular, we need to understand what Felix seems to hate the most in common with them: their shared sense of pride for Faerghast and chivalry as knights. It's obvious that Felix lives by his own set of values, and cares little for titles even as the heir to Notorious. But he absolutely detests the idea that people would value patriotism and chivalry.
You're correct. I don't understand why they revere knighthood. I won't be friends with anyone who believes in that nonsense.
Do you feel that way because of what happened in the tragedy of Duscur? I have heard the story. Your brother was one of the royal knights. He gave his life to defend the prince.
My brother was doing his job. My father is the real problem. When my brother's armor was brought back to the castle, do you know what he said? He died like a true knight. Chivalry begets the worship and glorification of death. Am I alone in finding that grotesque?
He's thought very poorly of those who continue to hold what he thinks is morally objectionable: chivalry, the combination of qualities expected of an ideal knight: courage, honor, justice, and the sacrifice to something besides oneself. He is repulsed by Dedue, calling him blindly obedient and later a rabid cur for forfeiting his own autonomy to be the prince's sword and shield. He criticizes Ingrid for her virtuous aspirations to follow Glenn's footsteps and demands that she ought to find a husband instead. He is relentlessly cold to his father and absolutely detests his conviction that Glenn died like a true knight. Felix thinks this is utter BS. Golly, does he ever hate Dimitri on the surface. Why does Felix hate Dimitri again? Because he thinks that his presentation as a dignified prince to Faerghast is just a lie, a cover-up to hide what Dimitri really is, and to hold onto that lie, to put himself on a pedestal and uphold the chivalrous values that Felix already deems to be objectionable, he finds doubly repulsive. Something else you can notice about Felix's close-mindedness, too, is that he's often just wrong about his evaluations of others. He's wrong about Dorothea, he's wrong about Dedue, he's wrong about Ingrid, he's very uncharitable towards Dimitri, he's wrong about Ash, he's wrong about Leonie. Dedue proves that Felix's assumptions that he's just an automaton for Dimitri is wrong by saving his life. He's very presumptive about Dorothea and is proven incorrect that she's just an airhead trying to sleep with him. He assumed that she's just a frivolous girl wanting to marry into power, when in reality, she is much more worldly wise. And his assumptions about the motivations behind Glenn's sacrifice are challenged when Ingrid starts to explain what her goals really mean to her. And he essentially preaches to Ash that authors of Knight's Tales are evil for seizing people's minds.
Friendship, loyalty, justice. Only fools allow their lives to be ruled by such nonsense. Fools who get themselves killed for nothing, only to be celebrated as heroes in books like this. Writers of these stories are worse than tyrants. They seize control of people's thoughts.
That's a little much. I was only interested in...
I don't care.
I agree with Ash. Just shut up, Felix. And to be clear, he's not totally wrong for his criticism of Faerghast, but he does become close-minded and disregards the values of others quickly. And it's clear that his biases warp his understanding of others. Honestly, if Dimitri weren't so self-loathing, I feel like he'd snap back at Felix too. And while it's understandable for Felix to be repulsed by Dimitri's sadistic side, he takes his language too far, dehumanizing him, equating him to a bore, when even Felix himself does care about him deep down, as his close old friend, from before the rebellion suppression.
Sometimes you have an animal's face, contorted with anger and bloodlust. At other times, a man's with a friendly smile. Which is your true face?
Felix already knew this. He already knew of Dimitri's two-sided personality, but he pretends he doesn't to ask this rhetorical question and defaults to his insults afterwards. Speaking of his insults, his support partners have their own ways to counter Felix's attitude. Dedue bites back at his insults towards Dimitri. Leonie calls him out for his weirdly sexist comment in the A support that she's good for a girl. Ingrid fires back hard at his assertion that she ought to abandon her dreams and just settle down with a husband. And Dorothea is ready to slap him across the face when he tells her to get over here to spar with him. So yeah, Felix is kind of biased and close-minded and really edgy with a lot of emotional baggage. Just because he's off the mark on his evaluations at times doesn't mean he doesn't learn from them. Behind the cold, unsociable, and unfriendly exterior lies someone who genuinely cares about the safety of his allies. He's very comfortable acting distant from others, but struggles to properly express his love and care for his friends. Expressing love to his support partners leaves him vulnerable and visibly uncomfortable. He's a great character, but he's no peach sorbet. Azama. Azama is the retainer of Hinoka, who he found after she crash-landed and tended to her wounds. He was impressed and amused by her unwillingness to die, and decided that he ought to help the princess of Hoshido. As her retainer, his own name was getting well known across the country, as did his notoriety among the monks of Hoshido. Azama is actually strongly disliked by many within the kingdom. I've heard more stories and rumors about you than I can count. Everyone knows you like to tease folks for your own amusement. You're the most notorious monk in this whole country. I had no idea my reputation was so bad these days. I'm utterly shocked. His bad reputation is also picked up by Hyato. The young legend heard about Azama's knack for carelessly hurling insults and getting under people's skin, so he casted a protective spell around him to prevent him from getting upset by them, with the benefit of making Azama dizzy. Longtime viewers of my content might remember my Supports That Suck video with Hinoka and Azama. There I stated that Azama's not just a mean-spirited character who consistently gets off on making others feel uncomfortable, bad about themselves, or insecure, that he's unapologetically blunt about his judgmental behavior over his peers, or that he enjoys annoying the absolute hell out of them just for fun. Essentially, Azama is an asshole. What gives Azama his ability to persist and carry on jovially throughout life, despite so much ire thrown his way, is that he simply doesn't care about what others think of him. He doesn't really take pride or shame in his reputation, but only laughs at it. He also doesn't care about hurting the feelings of his comrades in his unwarranted criticisms, observations, or evaluations. This is partially why people look at him with apprehension. He may claim that his insults are not meant to solely bring people down, or that his reading of Azura, while unwarranted and upsetting to her, was actually out of care more so than out of boredom. But let's not kid ourselves. Azama has a serial habit of being a capricious asshole, and if anger was the sentiment they wanted us, the player, to feel when reading his supports, they certainly succeeded. To some, seeing a morally flawed and edgy character like Azama may seem like a breath of fresh air, especially in Birthright, where characters are kinda bland and morally righteous. Some find Azama more amusing for crossing lines, but there are moments where Azama goes too far, foregoing his laid-back attitude and claims that he does not mean ill will from his insults, to pointedly harassing and bullying others in a downright vengeful way. Let's talk about Hyato again. He approaches Hyato in their C support, deliberately trying to put him down for being a short little kid and being afraid of ghosts, but to no avail. Hayato's protection spell was in effect. Azama is insulted and angry, and tells him that this means war. In the B support, he once again tries to scare him, but fails once more. Azama's trump card was a powerful magic amulet acquired from a holy spirit, but this amulet couldn't be used for selfish purposes, which makes him lose this battle that he's in. Wow, that's karma, I guess. Maybe it's a sign that Azama ought to stop, but he doesn't let up. In the A support, Hyato actually comes forward to apologize to him for going a little bit too far in his words in the B support, but his goodwill is met with a trap, and he's rendered immobilized by some fuck-off freeze spell and is forced to listen to Azama's scariest story, rendering him to tears. Azama does this just to get a win off him for none other than some petty competition that he started with a child. Then he bribes him with candy and they're all fine and dandy. It's obviously meant to be comedic. I don't mean to say Azama is completely unsalvageable. He does have some decent supports where he's reasonable and kind, despite his very, in-character delivery. But when you come into the game with such notoriety among your peers, and often antagonize others, and even getting the bonus of drawing ire from the player base? Welcome to the list. And that is going to do it for part 2 of the most hated miniseries of Fire Emblem character videos. Once more, please refer to the intent behind this video. It's not to say I hate anyone here, and we can save the quote-unquote character I personally hate the most for another day. If you made it until the end and found this video entertaining, I'd really appreciate it if you interacted with this video by simply leaving a like and commenting down below your thoughts. Whether it's about my analysis, the characters mentioned, or other characters that you think ought to be discussed here. Lastly, if you haven't subscribed yet, but you have been watching my videos, please consider subscribing, as it tells me that this is the content that people want to stick around for to watch. I'm really close to hitting 80,000 subscribers, and it would mean so much to actually hit that milestone. I'd be really thankful. With that all said, enjoy your weekend, and you'll see me again soon. Deuces.